I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker, who's going to lead us through conflict management, Beth Short.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. I'm an avid customer of farmers markets, and that's one of the things I always want to go to whenever, back in the olden days when we traveled, to go to every city's farmers market, even if I can't buy anything to take home with me. I love seeing the produce and the products. So thank you for the work that you do. We're going to talk today about conflict management, and you're going to do most of the work, but it's in an easy fashion. So what I hope to do is to really teach you a process that you can take back to wherever you come from and use actually not only for conflict resolution, but for other human relationship issues that you may be facing in your workplace or your volunteer work or your families. It's a great little process. It's wonderful for human relationships, so we'll go through all of that. I'm going to go pretty fast because we just have 45 minutes, and since I want you to do some group work, that takes up a little bit of time to extract everybody's knowledge. So I am happy to go back over something, and I'm happy to stick around for questions. I will tell you I am pretty deaf. I do wear hearing aids in both ears, but in a situation like this, if you have a question during the session, I'm happy for you to ask it, but you're going to have to stand up and be pretty loud for me to understand you. And I'm not shy about coming closer to you so that I can hear you. Just a little warning there. The good thing about being old is I'm fully vaccinated. The bad thing is going deaf. So whenever I do any kind of a problem-solving session for a group, whether it's conflict management or trying to come to some sort of resolution about an issue, I always start with the ground rules. And I find that even in interpersonal relationships, and I'm the only one who understands the ground rules, that these three that I've sort of distilled over the years work really well for me. Now, in a fully facilitated session, I would have you create your own ground rules so that you would have ownership. And that's not a bad thing to do, it's a good thing to do. But it does take time. And so over the years of doing, many sessions like this, I really have distilled what people have said as ground rules into 3 rules, and these work so well. And I'll give you an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to do that, but I will tell you I've never had anybody say that. So, in no particular order, the first thing I always ask of people is to focus. That is, let's talk about what we're supposed to be talking about. And everybody has those times when something is said and you have a blinding flash of an inspiration. When that happens to you, unrelated to what you're talking about, but when that happens to you, write it down. If you're old like me, you have to write it down or I forget what it was. But it's not the time to say, oh, wow, you know what that just made me think of? Something completely different, but really interesting. That's not what you want to do in a session. You want to try to focus on whatever it is that you've come to talk about or discuss. And so focus is my number one rule for any meeting. And it makes it easier or at least polite, for if you're the facilitator or if you're just a group member to say to someone who then has brought up something off topic to say, wow, I want to hear more about that. Maybe we can talk about that in our next meeting, but let's get back to what we were talking about, and pretty politely be able to do that. So focus. The second one is share the time. In any situation when you get together with people, you're going to have a limited amount of time. You might have a lot of time, but still going to be limited. And if a few people speak for really long periods of time, or they speak repeatedly, there are those people who feel like they have to share their opinions about everything that comes up every time. Then you end up with people who don't have the time to participate because somebody has taken more than their fair share of time. And so, as one of my ground rules, I always say, I want everybody to speak up. But don't feel like you have to simply give assent to something that somebody else has said. Well, I really agree with what Mary said. I think she's, and then you say why you agree, but there's no new information there. And so that's what you really want to look for when you're in a discussion, is what new information or a new opinion or a new perspective can I bring to this conversation? But I don't have to do that for every single time. So you want to really, if you think of it as sharing the time, I find it's much more pleasant than saying, okay, everybody can speak for 1 minute, and I'm going to keep count or that sort of thing. It can be very informal, but and you as a participant want to keep that in mind too. It's so odd to me that when I have a group that meets together regularly, I go through this, and there are folks who just think it doesn't apply to them. We don't hear a lot from those people, but they really do want to hear a lot from me. And you can't be subtle sometimes with people when you say, and so I will sometimes take people aside and say, you're speaking too frequently. You really need to share the time there. The third ground rule, focus, share the time. The third is actually probably the most important, and I call it honor each other. When you do ground rules, people will say things like, well, don't interrupt. Don't be on your phone. They'll come up with things like that, but they all sort of stir into the same pot of be nice to each other. So, obviously, then that means that you don't carry on side conversations. You try not to interrupt. But more than that, and this is something that will apply to everything that you do in any kind of human relationship, is you want to come to a discussion with the belief that you are here for the best resolution, and everybody else is too. And so if that they didn't come to this meeting just to make trouble, that even if they are not cognizant of it themselves, that they want things to be better than they are. That's typically what this all deals with, how can we make things better than they are. And so when someone says something and you don't understand how that suggestion could really make things better or how it applies, you ask for clarification in a really nice way. Help me understand. I love that phrase. Help me understand how we would manage that part of it. And then you listen. It's not just manipulation. You're listen. So you're trying to find, not to sound too new agey about it, you're trying to find everybody's truth. And you will find sometimes that people are just they're just mistaken. And sometimes you will find that they have a perspective or an experience with this that you don't have. And this is just not a way you ever looked at it. And so you want to go into these things thinking, what can I learn? I personally want to understand more and be in a better position than I was going into this. And then you want to help everybody. So those are my 3 ground rules. Focus, share the time, and honor each other. Anybody got a problem with those? So I'll ask you to take that same note and as you go into your discussions. So I was speaking earlier with somebody. The truth is that the end goal for any sort of discussion or conflict is in fact a common end goal. And if you can focus on what your end goal is, everybody's going to get there a lot better. You have to put that part of you that says, I just want to prove to them that I'm right, aside. And part of your duty is, if you are right, is to explain it in such a fashion and in such a tone and a manner that other people are convinced. But often that means that there is if you think of your idea as being, a solid ball, then at the end of a good discussion, there are going to be little nicks, and maybe it's an oval now, or maybe it's bigger than it was because you've learned things too. And so and it's what I often said to my kids when they were growing up and they had issues with friends and that sort of thing. I said, well, do you still want to be friends at the end of this? Is it more important to you to be right or to still have a friend? And that has, that's or a family member, or you have to have that common goal. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have you work in small groups. And I understand that Jade is going to make our virtual people into a little room of their own. So what I would like is for you to have no more than 4 people, but no fewer than certainly 2 at a table. And I know about social distancing. I'm sorry about that. So like, sir, here, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to get his attention here, get him to move to a table. So it looks like the rest of you are okay. Do you mind moving to another table? Just with these ladies here, I talked to them earlier. They're quite nice. So I'm going to give you a process, and this is called, it goes by many names, but we've always called it the experiential learning process. It's a wonderful way of bringing a group together to really draw from your own experience about how you manage things. You can't teach somebody math this way, but if it has to do with human relations, it's a good process. It's a wonderful process for coming up with solutions or ideas, say, for customer service, for example. And so I want you to learn the little process because then you can take it back and you can use it in your church groups, your volunteer groups, your work groups. Experience is easy. So I'm going to go through it first for our virtual people in particular. So we're going to talk about, our topic is conflict management. That's our content for this one. And that's the first thing you do. You should say, this is what we're talking about so everybody can focus. And then I'm going to ask every one of you individually to think of an incident or an experience in your life where you think conflict was handled well. We're going to do the positive. You can do negative and positive, and often if you want to get to the very bottom of an issue, you do it twice. And you ask people to think about a time when they had excellent customer service, or they, in this case, where they saw a conflict that was resolved or prevented very well. You can then go back. You always do the positive first. You can then go back and say, all right, talk about a time when it was really bad. But if you do both of those at the end, you end up with a really good list. So you think of an incident in your personal life. Now, it can be something that you experienced yourself. It can be something that you saw happen. And if you can't think of a time when you saw what you think of as certainly potential conflict handled well, then you can think about something you saw on television. You can think about a book you read. Or ideally, it's a personal experience. You think about a time. And then, so when you get that in your head, then you're going to write down just some key words. And you can do it on your phone, but it's important to write down the key words about this experience. Maybe the people who were involved, what the goal was, what was the environment. Not complete sentences, nobody's going to take it up. But the writing it down, which I know seems like trouble, it helps you focus in your head when you have to write something down. So you're going to write down a few words about this experience you've thought of. And then when everybody's done that, you're going to tell your story to everybody else at your table, one at a time. You're going to do it very quickly. So you really have no more than about 2 minutes each to tell this little story. So when you tell the story, that's what I want you to do, is just recount the incident. This is not the time where you say, here are the 4 things I think that she did right. Or you're not analyzing it, you're just telling the story. So here's an example of a time when I was able to resolve conflict. We're in a class setting. The topic was addiction. The speaker was actually a newspaper publisher, but she had a great deal of academic and personal experience with addiction. She's talking to the class. When she finishes, one of the class members is related to somebody who's running for public office. And she says to the woman who's speaking on addiction but is a newspaper editor, "Well, I can't believe that the newspaper is coming after us for our divorce records. This is personal information. It's so hurtful. Why are you doing that?" And the editor says, "Well, freedom of information. People need to know things about people." Anyhow, pretty soon it becomes, instantly, it becomes very unpleasant. So that's my job. So I stand up from the back of the room and walk between the two of them, and I say, "Well, this is awfully awkward. I think you're both making some good points, but as it turns out, this is not the place to have this discussion. Right now we're talking about addiction. As it turns out, and this was true, next month we're going to talk about the role that government and media play in each other. So this will be a perfect conversation for next month, but it's not for right now. And so with your permission, I'm going to call it a halt to this, and it's time to get on the bus. So gather your things, let's go." Later, the woman who had been the attacker came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for stopping me. I couldn't stop myself. I knew I needed to stop myself, but I just couldn't shut up." And later on, we actually worked through that conflict in a different time. Okay, so that's the story. That's just a little quick story. I hope I gave you enough details. The rest of you, as you're listening, listen, because you're trying to pick out things that worked or didn't work or were missing from the episode. So you want to be a good listener. You do not argue with the person who's telling the story, and you don't offer an opinion right then. You just listen. So if there's something you truly don't understand, you can ask a clarifying question. And you don't need to say, "Oh, that happened too, that happened to my mother." None of that. You just tell the story. Next person goes on. So when you have all shared your little stories, you talk about what did you hear. So try to come up with common themes. What worked? So in all those stories we heard, was there something that happened or didn't happen in all of them? Was there something a technique that you think somebody was using even though they might not have known that? What was the timeline for that? What made it work well? There are two different things that you can look for. Interventions, which is the story I told, I intervened in that situation. And often that's the case, but there are also preventions. Things that have been done before it ever happened that helped keep it from getting any worse than it got. So preventions and interventions that you may have be able to say, "Well, I think this is the reason this was handled so well." So you come up with those common themes, and I want somebody to make a little record of them, what you come up with. When you finish with that, I'm going to give you about 20 minutes for the whole process. We're going to share. So we're going to go around the table, and I'll go, and you'll say, "Well, one of the things we came up with is to resolve conflict is this." And then the next table will tell us whatever they've got on their list that is not the same thing that this table just said. And we'll try to get the virtual people in that mix too. The technology is totally behind me, but I think Jade can do that. So those are your instructions. As your group, I need you to come up with a little story about an experience that you've had, hence experiential learning process. Write down a few words, share the story, be very brief. If this will only happen with the in-person group, if somebody goes on and on and on, if the rest of you will just look at me beseechingly, I will come over and stand by the person who is going on too long. All right, because we want everybody to have time to share their stories. So try to do it in 2 minutes. Then you come out with your common themes, and I'll give you some little time hints about you should be doing this. Are you clear on your instructions for your group work? If you do not have an experience, you simply cannot think of anything. It is permissible but not ideal for you to say, "I'm sorry, I just can't think of anything," all right? Rather than come up, sometimes that happens. You've all had conflict in your lives. Maybe you've never seen it work out well. All right, with that, I'm going to let you start now in your groups. I'm going to give you a minute to write your stuff down, and then I'm going to call for you to, as soon as you finish writing it down, you all can manage yourselves. Somebody who has a good, usually I assign somebody to go first, like the person who has the longest thumb or something like that, but virtually it's hard, so the person who is most comfortable speaking first, go right ahead. They'd ask if I wouldn't mind taking my mask off so that you can hear me a little better, and I will, which I will do. And I will tell you, because I'm old, I'm fully vaccinated and past the waiting time. So I will move forward without my mask. So our time virtually has worked out, and now I'd like to hear from you all. So it looks like they brought me a handheld microphone, and we'll see whether I can pick it up and actually make it work. I'm not good at that. And I want you to share one thing from your table that you think leads to process of conflict resolution. Okay, so somebody's got to speak, figure it out. Share one thing from their list.
One of the things that we were looking at or added to our list is referring to the rules. A lot of times there's something backing up what you're saying. Bylaws in his case, mine was the U.S. flag code. So that was our basis of conflict resolution.
That's true. Isn't that true so often that we used to say with our teenagers, just because you want it to be that way doesn't make it that way. And sometimes you have to work through a process where people say, we might not think this is the best thing to be doing, but we're required to do it this way. And so the next step from we're required to do it this way, if we think it's not a good idea, and I understand you all have some regulations from the state that you think might not be a good idea, how do we move forward getting those changed? We're on your side. We have to live by them now, but how do we move forward? Who's going to speak from this table? Somebody has to. You made the list? Who's going to take the mic? There you go.
What am I talking about?
It's not scary.
We talked about how we had someone that wanted to.
Put it right up to your mouth.
Of course, that's great. We talked about how someone wanted to join our group, and they had an ulterior motive, and we didn't realize they had an ulterior motive until we had accepted them in. And it taught us a lot about how to have boundaries, and so that we didn't have to deal with those situations. You know, we already had that set up so that we wouldn't have to deal with it, and how we had to resolve that and then not let other people know that it happened. So it came out good.
Great, thank you. So she was saying that they had somebody join their group who really wasn't on the same page, had ulterior motives. And I have done a number of sessions with boards where somebody comes in or is on the board and says, we need to totally change everything we're about. And that can be a good conversation, but in the sessions I've run through that is, we have that person go through. So what is it that you think, how should we change? And they have a full discussion. And at the end of that sort of a full discussion, sometimes you have to take as a facilitator, I'd be the one that says, this group has decided they want to move in this direction, stay in this direction or move. If that is not acceptable to you, now that you have explained yourself fully and you have been heard and you're understood, this might not be the best place for you. And that you need to find an organization or a group who wants to do whatever it is that you want to do. And that's hard for people to say, this isn't the right place for you. But it's a heck of a lot better for the rest of you to have this person come to every meeting and bring up the same dadgum thing every time when you have examined it thoroughly. So that is not uncommon. And having a good open discussion, sometimes with an outside person, to make sure that the outlier is heard and understood and you really don't agree with it as a group. All right, this group, what have you got? Want to go over here?
Thank you. When we were sharing our experiences, we noticed some common thread around timing and context of not only, finding the right, when is it appropriate for the situation to respond, but also checking in with our own kind of emotional state and mental state and not trying to respond out of emotion, but kind of from a place of logic and fairness consideration.
Another great suggestion, and here's something I would add to that. When I go to groups where we're having an issue, what I start with are always some get-to-know-you activities, not silly, dumb things like show your keys. But I'll just ask them, okay, I want you to all go around and tell me where you were born. Because everybody was born somewhere, and it's not embarrassing to anybody. So I never ask a question that would embarrass somebody. I would never go into a group and say, where'd you go to college? Because there'll be people who didn't go to college. And so I give some thought. But the fuller picture you can draw of the other people in the group, the better your conversation will be. When you start looking at the other people in your group as fully realized human beings, then you're a little bit more likely to listen and for them to listen to you. And so the other thing, so I would always start every group with something that just shares a little personal information, nothing embarrassing, about themselves, so you start to know who that person is. And then, you're talking about their emotional state, is if you come into a situation and everybody is mad, you're not going to get anywhere. And so you've got to work through the mad first. And say, when I hear people say, oh, we're going to have a gripe session, I think, oh my gosh, that's something you can do in the parking lot, but you don't do it in a meeting. You don't have a gripe session where everybody, let's talk about everything negative. And so that is, to get people out of a mad situation, there are some kind of icebreakery things where you try to get it to the positive. What's the best thing you get out of this organization? What do you wish other people knew about it? What do you think people misunderstand about it? Where they begin to share their full, and you're trying to walk them back from being mad. All right, who's going to speak here?
I guess I would. So our conflict was about masks. We're both, Jody and I are both market managers, and obviously here in the city, you all have to have masks. Where I'm located in Piedmont, you do not. There's not a mandate. There has not been one. And she has customers that get mad about it and have problems with it, and she typically uses that this is a mandate, and I'm not responsible for this mandate, but I'm responsible to enforce this mandate, and that's why I have to make you wear this mask. I talk to my vendors on my vendor page and have them respect people. I can't force them to wear a mask because of where I'm located at, but I tell them if you have a customer that comes up with a mask on and they feel like they're uncomfortable and you don't want to wear a mask, step back, give them 10 feet. Personal respect. That's what I talk to my vendors about, so to resolve stuff like that.
Always, as respectful as you can be. Now, we've all been in situations where, well, I'll tell you, I thought I could talk anybody into pretty much anything in a nice, respectful way and have them feel good about it. And then when I was trying to do that with somebody who was drunk, I discovered that, in fact, I was never going to be successful. I tried all my tricks. And in the end, I had to go get a police officer and ask him if he would ask him to leave. And this guy was not in uniform. And I'm still pretty stunned. This fellow walked up to him and said very, very nicely, he said, sir, this is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And the guy turned on his heel and fled. And that's all he said. And so obviously I have a lot to learn about tone of voice or something. But it's so difficult when somebody is breaking a rule and you're the one who has to say, I'm sorry, no dogs. I'm sorry, you got to wear a mask. And what you said was you stayed respectful and you referred back to this is not a decision I'm making personally. Another good thing to point out to people is that it is so important to be consistent. And I I can't let you come in without a mask and then then tell anybody else they have to do it. And so I've got to do this. But this table right here. You don't have any. You're not having. If you don't have anything new to share, let's say now. I went to you. Excuse me. I'm step right. Have I done? I hadn't done you all, have I? You first to finish.
Hi, so just to touch base on what you were discussing a second ago, with knowing your audience, it helps you respond to however they are bringing the conflict to you. So each audience may have a different trouble that they see. And so just because you don't see that, that could still be an issue in the community. So lots of times you just have to know where they're at and how to approach what their problem is.
It's another way of saying, help me understand where we are. And I understand we're out of time. I'm going to give you one last little tip. And these days, I know you can look. Oh, your breakout has something to say. Great.
Can you hear me okay? This is Laura Matlock. Yep. Our group talked a lot more about just one-on-one conflict. If I need to quit screaming, give me thumbs down. Need to talk louder, give me thumbs up. Okay. So we talked about the idea of everyone shared their thoughts, at the beginning of the conflict. And that ultimately we decided that we can't take it too personal when we're in a conflict. That's not really the end all be all to the situation. And in some cases, there was a yield to the one with most power or ability to be empowered in the conflict, whether it be a parent-child relationship or a husband-wife conflict, that sometimes you just kind of have to yield to the one. I put power in soft quotes, like, there's always got to be one person that takes. That was it.
Excellent points that she made there. Two things that I'll go off of there. When you are bringing a group together to resolve a conflict, you must include the people who are, so to speak, on the other side. You don't say, let's meet on Tuesday because Doug, who is the big problem, can't be there on Tuesdays. Because then you're going to have the same meeting when Doug can be there. So always include, I don't want to call them the troublemakers, but you need to include those people so that they're a part of the conversation and you can respond to their issues. And it totally escaped me what she said, and I thought that was excellent. So I hope you all got that, of those things. So, the other thing is, the last thing is, it's most important when conflict arises to accept the fact. This has happened, we're in it, we have to deal with it. There are some things that if you just wait a week, it will go away by itself. But for most things, you'll know. And so people don't want to be the one to say, we got to deal with this. But you must. And you will almost always find that if you go ahead and deal with whatever is going on, you can resolve it. Sometimes, not for everybody. Sometimes somebody leaves or is angry. But most of the time, in my experience, it works out. And so that you all have kind of written the book here and given some suggestions for how you work through conflict. Obviously, there are, as you go drive home today, think about what else is there? What could I do? What can we do ahead of time so that we head off this conflict? We publish the rules. We talk about consistency. We have meetings with the people who are unhappy. What can we do to prevent conflict from bubbling over? Sometimes you have to, if somebody's standing there with no mask on, I'm sorry, I was supposed to take mine off. If I'm standing there with no mask on, you can't put it off till next week. You got to deal with it. What I know is that while you're very uncomfortable dealing with it, everybody around you is so proud of you and so happy. And typically the other people's reaction will be not, why were you so mean to that man, but what took you so long? So if you can kind of keep that in your time frame, is that other people want somebody to deal with it. Sometimes it's you. Thank you all for your service to your farmers market and your local agriculture. I know many of you are volunteers. What a great way to serve your community. And I appreciate your being there, and if you have any questions, I'll stand here for a minute.
No, you're fine. All right, any last questions for Beth? Beth, thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom with us about conflict management.